What legendary weapon that was removed do you miss the most? While some of you may have thought about the rate weapons like Midnight Coup, I'm sure some of you guys thought about the seasonal weapons that have been sunset and banished to the DCV like the Forge weapons. And that's what we're here to talk about today. We're going to be going over every seasonal weapon that has been sunset and yet to return back to Destiny 2 in the current state that we know it. If this video ends up being helpful, make sure to hit the like button, and if you're new, go ahead and subscribe as we'd love to have you, and let's do this. Also, side note, I'm back home for the holidays, so that's why the setup's a little different. Merry Christmas if you celebrate. To start things off, let's go back to the very beginning. No, not that far back. Good old Curse of Osiris. The time that almost led to the death of Destiny 2 as we know it. Despite that, weirdly I look back at parts of this fondly, but maybe that's just me. In this era, we didn't have seasonal weapons, but we did have a pretty close equivalent for players that wanted to grind during this period. And oh boy was it a grind. We had Prophecy weapons, and I'm not talking about the Prophecy dungeon. Keep in mind, some of these weapons returned in Season of Dawn, but even those versions are sunset as well. For starters, we had the Garden Progeny 1 Scout Rifle. This high impact 150 was pretty decent in the era of double primary. I found it to be a pretty fun replacement for other PvE scouts at the time like Nameless Midnight and the Does Not Compute. Next we had the Conqueror 2. The thing I remember about this SMG is that it had kill clip, which may not seem like much now, but back in the day when we were significantly weaker, this made the gun feel really good. Moving on, we have the Jack Queen King 3. This 140 hand cannon was pretty fun to use back in the day if you didn't have the Midnight Coup or DFA. This weapon actually saw a return in Season of Dawn, but it's still sunset, so it remains on this list. Next we have the Machina Day 4. This high impact pulse rifle didn't see a ton of love due to the other options, but there were some people that really enjoyed this weapon. Moving on, we have the Traveler's Judgment 5 sidearm. This 3-round burst sidearm was a fun alternative to Last Hope to use in PvP back in the day. This was another weapon that saw a return in the Season of Dawn, but is still sunset. The Soul Pariah 6 is next on our list, and it's a 900 RPM SMG. In an era of static rolls, I found myself preferring the Conqueror with kill clip, but I remember some really enjoying this weapon for what it was. Going back through these really made me remember how much I love the names of some of these weapons. Next we have the West of Sunfall 7 hand cannon. It was a 180 with auto-loading holster as its final perk. Admittedly, I think 180s were in a pretty rough position until we arrived in the Luna's Not Forgotten era, but it was still pretty cool. Next we have the Infinite Paths 8 pulse rifle. Sounds like a weapon for pain. This pulse rifle found its way back in the Season of Dawn, but we'll talk about it in its Curse of Osiris state. It had Dragonfly, which made the pulse a lot more fun in the PvE side of things when comparing it to the Machina Day 4. It was alright in PvP as well. We can't forget about the Null Calamity 9 600 RPM auto rifle coming in next. In a PvP era of team shots, this weapon performed decently in the Crucible. It wasn't awful in PvE either, just wasn't anything that was jaw-dropping. Lastly, for the 10 Prophecy weapons, we had the Future Safe 10 sword. Nothing too crazy going on with this sword. I'm not sure if anybody even remembers this existed, but it did, and it held down the heavy slot for the 10 Prophecy weapons, so I guess that counted for something. While collecting all these Prophecy weapons was a brutal grind, you could also get a few special rewards if you did put in the time to collect all of these. If you collected 5 of these Prophecies, you could obtain the perfect Paradox shotgun, which was a beast back in the day with Rampage. This weapon returned in Season of the Dawn as well. Lastly, one of my most asked questions is how do you get the Sagira Ghost Shell? Well, that could be obtained getting all of these weapons that we just talked about for some bonus knowledge. It'll be really interesting to see if these weapons ever return and get updated. I think we've had a few Vex seasons that these really could have fit in with. With the Vex themed episode coming in final shape, we'll just have to wait and see where things go. Next, let's talk about some of the weapons that came out during Forsaken. As you know, we have the Dreaming City weapons like Retold Tale, Vouchsafe, and company that have been reprised now multiple times. But what about the Tangled Shore weapons? There are quite a lot of them that you may have forgotten about, and I think this would have been the perfect season to bring them back versus the Dreaming City weapons that have now been reprised twice. We're going to be breaking the Tangled Shore weapons into 2 teams, Team Red and Team Green. Can't escape the Christmas theme. Let's start with the Red team. And with Team Red, let's start off with the Ether Doctor. I don't have a ton of memories in Forsaken using this 600 RPM auto rifle. What I do remember is that the Ether Doctor dropped early before Forsaken even launched, and you could test it out before the DLC even came out for those that remember. Bungie used to drop some of the weapons prior to the DLC. Not sure why they went away from this. Let's talk about the wrong side of right for a bit now. This high impact kinetic scout rifle was decent, but never really found its way into any metas. It was alright in both PvE and PvP, but it didn't really excel in either. Could definitely use a second chance. Next we have the Trackless Waste 900 RPM kinetic SMG. This weapon was actually pretty good and had some decent perk options. The biggest thing I remember about this weapon was that it just wasn't Midnight Coup, and SMGs didn't reign supreme in the Crucible yet like it does in this era. Moving on to a hand cannon that's kind of been lost in time. The Thin Line 120 RPM hand cannon. Truth be told, I always preferred weapons like Duke and Criminal's Dagger over this weapon when it came to 120s, but the cool thing was, this one was in the energy slot. If I needed something void, it was a decent option. We talked about the wrong side of right, but let's now talk about the right side of wrong energy pulse rifle. I really liked what they did with the names here. Funny enough, more so than the weapons themselves. This 450 RPM solar pulse rifle was decent, but it never really got its time to shine. I think it could really benefit from an overhaul. Now for the moment that at least some of you guys have been waiting for. Let's talk about the team captain of Team Red, the Dust Rock Blues, one of the king shotguns in the Forsaken era. This along with Not Forgotten or Luna's Howl struck fear in the Crucible. If you saw someone with the Dust Rock Blues that really knew how to use it, you were in for a really long game. This precision frame kinetic shotgun will always be held in high regard, similar to something like Matador in Destiny 1. There's really a lot of nostalgia with this weapon. This video is sponsored by Enlisted. Enlisted is a new kind of first-person shooter that couples PvP with PvE combat. You can take command of a squad of customizable AI soldiers and fight in a massive battle with hundreds of targets led by other players. Enlisted offers multiple campaigns to play through featuring unique weapons, vehicles, and equipment from the outskirts of 1941 Moscow to the heart of Berlin in 1945. You can play Enlisted for free on Xbox, PC, and PlayStation. The game has incredible graphics and details which looks absolutely stunning. Enlisted has over 100 weapons, tanks, and aircrafts to choose from so you can play how you want to play. One thing I really recommend is the campaigns because of how varied they are. They feel more like individual games. You can play Enlisted for free on the PC, PlayStation, or Xbox by using my link in the description or in the pinned comment. You'll get a free bonus pack for registering using my link that includes multiple weapons, soldiers, and a premium account. Thank you so much again to Enlisted for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back into it. That wraps up Team Red. Let's now talk about Team Green. I feel like we're in some type of Pokemon game. Starting off, let's talk about another shotgun, the Batlander. This was an arc rapid-fire shotgun that performed pretty decently. It didn't garner anywhere near the love its counterpart, the Dust Rock Blues, did, but it was still a pretty good shotgun nonetheless. Next, let's talk about a 140 kinetic hand cannon, the 10 Paces. This hand cannon was pretty decent. It just got overshadowed by the insane hand cannons that were around during this era. If people weren't using the Not Forgotten or Luna's Howl, they were usually using the Trust to try to earn the Not Forgotten in Luna's Howl. I think this weapon would really benefit from a refresh. Let's next talk about the Misfit. This ARC 720 RPM auto rifle in my opinion had a little more utility over the Ether Doctor. Regardless, with the addition of the Tiger Spite, that ended up being the more sought after auto rifle over these two Tangled Shore counterparts. I would love to see how Bungie would tweak these weapons to make them better. The Cut and Run is a weapon that you don't really hear anything about. It was an energy high-impact scout rifle. I did find myself enjoying this weapon more than the wrong side of right, but that wasn't really saying too much. Both scouts could benefit from a refresh. Next we have quite the name, the Death by Scorn. Really, this was the only thing memorable about it, unfortunately. It was a Void 2-burst firing sidearm that was honestly decent fun. It just happened to not be called the Last Hope, and that really sums up why it was overshadowed. I would love to see this come back and get a second chance in the current Destiny 2. Let's talk about another SMG next, the Bad Reputation 600 RPM Solar SMG that was decent fun honestly. It was okay in PvE, it just was outshined and met the same fate in PvP as well. It's a weapon that would be happy to see some love with an update. Next, let's talk about the second in command of the green team that you really would think was the team captain, but everything will make sense in a second. We have the Go Figure. This was arguably one of the best Tangled Shore weapons, period. This aggressive 450 RPM pulse rifle was a beast, and I can't tell you how many times I died to this weapon in the Crucible. There will always be a lot of nostalgia tied to this weapon as it was a fan favorite. Now let's talk about the team captain of Team Green, and maybe of all the weapons in general. It was a weapon honestly worthy of being an exotic, and was left sunset because even in today's power crept state, it would still reign supreme. The Edge Transit. Yeah. Arguably one of the best weapons in the history of Destiny 1 and Destiny 2, this Void Grenade Launcher struck fear in the hearts of Scorn all over the Tangled Shore. You just had to be there. Comment below if you remember this weapon. You'd think we'd be done after a climax like that, but there is one final weapon on Team Green that we have to talk about. And it's one that you might not even know existed. The Terran Wind. This was a solar grenade launcher that looked not just similar, but legit exactly like Edge Transit. Sometimes I would get this weapon and think it was the Edge Transit in my inventory. Bungie literally made the exact same looking weapon to the T, just solar in a rapid fire frame. This weapon was lost to time because people only remember its big brother. I don't really have anything else to say on it. Next, let's talk about another set of weapons that a lot of people thought will be returning this season, since we already have seen Season of Opulence and Season of the Drifter weapons return. You already know where I'm going with this. It's time to talk about the infamous Season of the Forge weapons, arguably some of the best legendary seasonal weapons in Destiny 2's history. Most of these weapons need no introduction, so I'm going to be brief with these. Starting off, we have the Spiteful Fang. This bow performed well in both PvE and PvP. My biggest memory with this bow was shooting it for 24 hours straight in Niobe Labs. This bow will always hold a special place in my heart. I think with a few tweaks here and there, this bow could be really good in today's Destiny 2. Next, let's talk about the Ringing Nail Solar 450 RPM auto rifle. This was another weapon that performed decently on both the PvE and PvP side. Depending on what I was doing, Rampage, Killclip, or Dragonfly all felt fantastic on this weapon. There were other Forge weapons that I think overshadowed both this weapon and the bow, but I still think they were pretty good nonetheless. One Forge weapon that I think was forgotten about by most people was the Striker's Surehand Sword. You could do pretty decent PvE damage with this sword, but despite it having that going for it, this sword was definitely one that's not in too many people's memories. If you remember this sword, let me know in the comments. Moving on, we have the Totterer's Gaze. I love this sniper rifle so much. It was an arc energy sniper rifle and it was an aggressive frame. This was another weapon that I had on for 24 hours in Niobe Labs. The thing most people remember about this sniper is hitting one-shot bodies when you had Killclip procced. This was some of the most fun I've had with any sniper rifle in the Crucible. Definitely one that will never be forgotten about. Next, let's talk about the Blast Furnace, one of the most popular seasonal weapon pulse rifles of all time, if not the most popular. Blast Furnace is beloved by a ton of Destiny 2 veterans. This kinetic aggressive burst 450 RPM pulse rifle felt amazing. If this weapon ever came back, I know that a lot of Destiny 2 veterans will be really happy. It performed fantastic in PvP and honestly wasn't bad in PvE either. I want to talk about one of my favorite weapons of all time in Destiny 2's history next, the Hammerhead. Definitely one of the most well-known LMGs in Destiny 2's history. Part of the reason why this weapon meant so much to a lot of players is that LMGs didn't exist in Destiny 2 vanilla and weren't reintroduced until Black Armory. Most people forget this fact, and it's really why when Bungie delivered this amazing LMG, it meant so much to the community. This Void LMG was a beast, and it was one that I pretty much never took off during Black Armory. Lastly, let's talk about the infamous Killclip Rampage gun. You heard right, the first of its kind, the Kindled Orchid. This Void 140 RPM hand cannon could roll with, you heard it right, Killclip and Rampage at the exact same time. This led to it being an absolute beast in PvP and PvE. This weapon will never be forgotten about, and if it wasn't sunset, it probably would still be used to some capacity today. It'll be interesting to see if when the Forge weapons return, if they do, if they will bring this perk combination back. We'll just have to wait and see, I guess. Also, not sure if they count, but I'm going to mention a couple extra Forge weapons as well, and it'll make sense in just a second. Let's talk about the Balligant XU7743, the Show of Force XF4865, the Atlanta D XG1992, the Galliard 42XN7568, the Swift Ride XE8375, the Tango 45 XK5094, the Deadman Walking XX7463, the Acantha D XK8434, and the Who Scout XE5837. The reason why I said I don't know if these count is that these were random drop Forge weapons that were remakes of existing weapons just with the Season of the Forge coat of paint and some new roles. Let me know if you'd like to see these weapons return and which one was your favorite. Mine personally was the Galliard. Next, let's take a brief stop at the Season of the Drifter. Now I know what you're already saying, wait, those weapons came back in Season of the Deep, and you're 100% correct. But what if I told you one weapon was forgotten about? The Doomsday Grenade Launcher. This arc grenade launcher was just a grenade launcher. It was another weapon lost to time. Most people don't even remember that it existed. It'll be interesting to see if it ever returns. Moving on, we're going to skip Season of Opulence as all of the weapons from Menagerie have returned in some shape or form, like Austringer, Beloved, and Callous Mini-Tool. Let's now talk about Season of Undying, which funny enough, this season we got some of the weapons from it in Season of the Wish, like Optative and Imperative. You may not have realized, however, that they left two weapons in the past to be forgotten about. The first of these being the Pluperfect Auto Rifle. This kinetic 360 RPM did not deserve to have the word perfect in its name. It was okay and its perks slightly made up for things. It performed decently in Crucible and PvE, but there weren't a ton of people asking for this thing to return, and maybe that's why in reality, it didn't return. The second weapon was the Temporal Claws. This weapon I would have actually rather had than some of the weapons that we ended up getting in Season of the Wish. This Void Rapid Frame LMG had some fun rolls, and I remember enjoying auto-loading holster in Rampage and auto-loading holster in Surrounded. We'll have to see if it ever returns. Next, we have the Season of Dawn weapons, and some of these are really missed by Destiny 2 players of this era. Starting with the Steel Feather Repeater 720 RPM Kinetic Auto Rifle. Personally, I remember really liking Feeding Frenzy and Multi-Kill Clip on my PvE version of this gun. Overall, this weapon performed decently in PvE and PvP and was one that was definitely worth trying during this time. Moving on, we have the Patron of Lost Causes Kinetic Scout Rifle. This lightweight frame 200 RPM scout rifle was a scout rifle. I remember enjoying rapid hit and explosive payload, but there were some other combinations that were cool to try. This scout wasn't bad, but I think it just suffered from there being better options. It would be interesting to see how it performed if it was updated. Next, let's talk about the Gallant Charge Fusion Rifle. This high-impact fusion rifle was pretty decent, but it really could have benefited from a new perk pool if it wanted to compete with the likes of Riptide or Cartesian on the PvE side of things. On the PvP side of things, it was a decent substitute to the Air Tail. Let's move on to the Line in the Sand fusion rifle. This linear was decent enough, but it kinda just barely missed the era where it really could have shined with the likes of Threaded Needle and Reed's Regret, or even the Storm Chaser. It was a precision frame linear and it was an arc weapon. It was pretty cool and I think it deserves a second chance. Breachlight is a weapon that might sound familiar. The Kinetic 2-burst sidearm was a pretty decent one that performed well in PvE and PvP activities. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but it was one that got a decent bit of love in Season of the Dawn. Would be interesting to see if it got updated. We're going to talk about a fan favorite next, the Martyr's Retribution. This weapon will always be legendary amongst all the weapons to exist in Destiny 2. That mainly is because it was the first of its kind. It was the first wave frame GL to ever exist in Destiny 2. The weapon was solar and it was a blast to use in the Sundial activity. Next, let's talk about the Trophy Hunter that could be first obtained in the Season Pass. This sniper is held in super high regard amongst Destiny players. It was an aggressive frame void sniper rifle that hit insanely hard. It was a ton of fun to use in PvP and PvE alike, and I would love to see this weapon come back with snipers being a lot better. Another Season Pass weapon that might not have been so memorable was the Pyroclastic Flow rocket launcher. This solar precision frame rocket was decent, but being honest, it was nothing insanely special. You weren't going to be kicked from any LFGs for not having this weapon. Overall, it's one that I'd love to see get the Apex Predator style of treatment. Lastly, I just wanted to mention that Perfect Paradox did make a return this season, but even this version is sunset as well. After this, something big happened. Sunsetting with weapons was cancelled, so no weapons past this point were sunset. Season of the Worthy had weapons like the 7th Seraph Saw, the 7th Seraph Officer Revolver, and the 7th Seraph Carbine, and a lot of these things we can get from the likes of Xur, the Spire of the Watcher Dungeon, and the Gunsmith as well. Season of Arrivals also had guns that released pre-Witch Queen that are available as well. Some of these admittedly are kinda difficult to get your hands on. You really are on the Gunsmith and Xur's time when it comes to some of these weapons. A few of these weapons you might recognize like the False Promises, the Whispering Slab, the Cold Denial, the Hollow Words, Temptation's Hook, and the fan favorite, the Falling Guillotine. The last time the Gunsmith sold the Falling Guillotine for reference was in April. Unfortunately, it was also removed from Dares of Eternity per this Reddit post. So as you can see, these weapons can be a little tougher to get your hands on, so maybe at some point they can make these easier too. And just like that takes us to the end of our journey. My question to you is, what seasonal weapon do you miss the most, and what seasonal set of weapons do you think Bungie's gonna bring back next? Thanks for watching. Don't forget, you can play Enlisted for free on the PC, PlayStation, or Xbox by using my link in the description or in the pinned comment. You'll get a free bonus pack for registering using my link that includes multiple weapons, soldiers, and a premium account.